Welcome to Life Stories, where one woman walked into a wedding alone and walked out with the power to change the world. Imagine dedicating your life to saving others, risking everything in war zones, evacuating children under fire, only to return home and be treated like an embarrassment. No red carpet, no welcome sign, just cold glances, whispered gossip, and a family more concerned with seating charts than sacrifice. But what happens when the one person everyone dismissed becomes the only one worth listening to? And what if the most humiliating night of her life becomes the turning point for something far greater? This is not just a story about judgment or redemption. It's about the moment someone finally sees you for who you really are and the quiet, unstoppable revolution that follows. Let's step inside the ballroom and begin. Lauren Hayes had walked into war zones with nothing but a flak jacket and a clipboard, had negotiated medical evacuations under sniper fire, and had once performed an emergency tracheotomy on a child using a pen barrel and surgical tape. But nothing, not even years of operating on the edge of catastrophe, prepared her for the chill of stepping alone into the grand ballroom of the Astoria estate. Her heels clicked against polished marble as chandeliers overhead glittered like 1,000 indifferent stars. Every head didn't turn, but enough did. The silence between polite conversations thickened just enough for her to feel it crawl over her skin. A woman in a rose gold dress leaned toward her husband and whispered behind her champagne flute. A young man in a tux nudged his friend and pointed. Lauren straightened her back. She wasn't dressed like them. Her navy sheath dress had cost less than the centerpieces on each table, but she had chosen it carefully. It covered the long scar down her forearm and fit well enough to be called elegant. Her short, sun-lightened hair was neatly combed, but even the most flattering mirror wouldn't erase the fine lines etched by exhaustion or the calm alertness of someone used to being watched through crosshairs. She spotted her mother across the room, Evelyn Hayes in tailored pastel, her hand fluttering anxiously as she hurried over. "You're late," her mother hissed under her breath, kissing Lauren's cheek too quickly. "And alone." "I told you I would be," Lauren replied evenly. "Yes, but I thought you'd come to your senses," Evelyn said, scanning her daughter like a recruiter evaluating a deeply unimpressive resume. "Madison's marrying into the Whitmore family. You showing up like this. It's not a great look." Lauren gave a thin smile. "I'm not here for optics." "You never are," her mother muttered before looping an arm through hers. "Try not to make a scene. And please, don't talk about bombs or orphans tonight." Lauren's father, George, was more restrained when he greeted her, but the pinch in his smile betrayed his unease. The room was crawling with the Whitmores and their empire of polished privilege. Old money, new money, and the kind of people who said Africa as if it were a single sad country. Madison Hayes, radiant in designer lace and marrying into a legacy older than the Constitution, looked beautiful. Too beautiful. Artificial. Like a high-end porcelain figurine carefully posed, rather than the freckled little sister who used to sneak ice cream with Lauren after bedtime. And yet, she barely met her sister's eye. "You made it," Madison said, voice light but wary. "Your dress is understated." "I thought understated would be less offensive than functional," Lauren said. Madison's lips twitched, uncertain if it was a joke. "Just don't argue with Brandon's family. They're very traditional." "I've noticed," Lauren said, eyes drifting to a circle of men near the bar where one of the uncles, Robert Whitmore, if she remembered correctly, was already making declarative statements about the decline of family values and those types who never settle down. As the ceremony began, Lauren found her name misspelled on the seating chart, Lorraine Hales, and assigned to a table of elderly relatives and what appeared to be the Whitmore family's retired gardener. The metaphor was almost too neat. She said nothing. She never did at events like these. Silence was safer than explaining why she hadn't brought a date, why she wasn't married, why she wasn't tired of saving the world yet. She'd tried once to describe what her job meant, the refugee camps, the split-second decisions, the way a generator could mean the difference between life and death in a neonatal unit. Her cousin had responded with, "That's cool. So like, are you ever home for Thanksgiving?" During the reception, Lauren stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching couples spin beneath fairy lights strung like a net of dreams. She sipped champagne sparingly, checking her phone for updates from her team back in Jordan. A message blinked through. Unexpected influx. Unaccompanied minors need protocol confirmation. She began typing a response, heart tightening with urgency. Is that the Global Relief Coalition logo? A voice asked. Lauren looked up. A young woman in a catering uniform stood beside her, cautious but curious. My brother's village in Nepal. Your team was the first to get there after the quake, she said quietly. He says you saved their lives. Lauren's throat tightened. She gave a small nod. Thank you for telling me. For a fleeting second, she felt grounded, validated. Then the microphone crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, came the voice of Melissa Whitmore, the bride's new sister-in-law, with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no. We've realized that our beautiful bride is perfectly matched, but her sister is here without a +1, and we simply must fix that. A spotlight swung across the room. Lauren froze. Let's help the brave humanitarian find her happy ending, Melissa declared, her voice syrupy with mock sincerity. Thomas, where are you? Come on, give us a smile. Laughter, claps, encouragement. The crowd turned toward her. Lauren didn't move, her hands clenched at her sides. She could handle airlifts in war zones, but this public spectacle of pity masked as playfulness, it made her feel like she was 13 again and wearing secondhand shoes to the school dance. Then a voice, low, firm, cut through the murmurs. Excuse me. A man in his 60s, tall and silver-haired, stepped into the light. I believe introductions can wait, he said, taking the microphone from Melissa with effortless authority. I have something more important to say. The crowd hushed. I'm Grant Ellison. Some of you know me as Brandon's great uncle. Others know me from my work with the United Nations. A pause. The silence thickened. Earlier today, I had the extraordinary honor of recognizing someone here. Captain Lauren Hayes. Lauren blinked. What was happening? This woman has led multiple emergency evacuation operations in active war zones. Last April, she coordinated the safe passage of over 600 civilians under heavy artillery fire in Baghlan province, without casualties. Gasps. Her strategic protocols are now being adopted as international standards. Her leadership is saving lives every day, while many of us worry about floral arrangements and seating charts. He turned to Lauren. Captain Hayes, on behalf of the people whose lives you've saved and those who understand the true meaning of service, I thank you. And then he bowed. A full, formal, diplomatic bow. For one suspended breath, the room didn't know what to do. Then someone, Eleanor Whitmore, the grandmother, began to clap. The applause spread like a spark on dry grass, slow and then suddenly thunderous. Have you ever stood in a room full of people who misjudged you, only to be seen, truly seen for the first time? What would you do if the truth about who you are shattered every assumption others built around you? Lauren stood in the spotlight, applause swelling around her, heart pounding as she realized that this night, intended to diminish her, had just detonated into something entirely unexpected, and she wasn't finished yet. The applause had faded, but its echo still hummed in Lauren's ears as she returned to her seat, hands trembling slightly, heart drumming with something more than shock. Relief, maybe, or fury, or something in between. The ballroom had shifted. Suddenly, she wasn't invisible, or worse, an oddity. She was recognized, and not by a fashion committee, but by someone who actually understood the weight of the world she carried. It should have felt like victory, but instead, something inside her cracked. People now approached her with forced warmth, dripping compliments they never would have considered hours earlier. Constance Whitmore, who had once said with a smile that Lauren would look lovely with a bit of effort, now draped an arm around her like they were long-lost confidants. I had no idea you were that kind of important, she purred. You must come to our foundation gala next month. The stories you could tell. Lauren smiled thinly. Her stories weren't cocktail anecdotes. They were blood and dust and the screaming silence of grief. She doubted anyone here could stomach even a fraction of the truth. As if conjured by the shift in mood, Madison approached. Still in her gown, still breathtaking. but her expression had changed. Less rehearsed, more raw. She didn't speak right away, just stood there beside her sister like she wasn't sure how to begin. Then, quietly, she said, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Lauren blinked. "Tell you what? All of it. The evacuations, the leadership awards. I thought you ran medical logistics, paperwork and planning. I didn't know you were in the field. I didn't know you risked your life." "I told you," Lauren said, her voice low. "You didn't ask." It came out colder than she meant. Madison flinched, but nodded. Fair. She glanced over her shoulder toward Brandon, who was surrounded by donors and family friends. "You scared the hell out of them, you know." Uncle Grant's speech? They didn't see that coming. "Neither did I," Lauren said. Madison hesitated. "I owe you an apology." Lauren studied her sister's face. There had been a time, long ago, when Madison had been her shadow, following her through muddy creeks and under blankets during thunderstorms. That girl had grown into a woman whose life revolved around appearances, whose success was measured in designer labels and the social calendar of Manhattan's elite. But beneath the makeup and couture, Lauren now saw something real. A flicker of guilt, a glimmer of shame. "I should have said something," Madison added, "when Melissa pulled that matchmaking stunt, when Mom kept trying to fix you, when everyone laughed." Lauren didn't respond right away. She felt a hollowness in her chest, not because she needed the apology, but because she hadn't realized how long she'd stopped expecting one. The conversation was interrupted by a buzz in her clutch. Her phone. A new message from Martin, her second-in-command in Jordan. The situation with the refugee children had escalated. A measles outbreak had spread through the new arrivals. They needed medical clearance to bring in outside aid workers. They needed her. Now. She stared at the screen, thumb hovering, her other hand clenching around the edge of the table. For years, her work had operated in a separate dimension from her family life. She'd compartmentalized to survive, suitcases and goodbyes and unspoken distances. But suddenly her two worlds had collided in the middle of a glittering ballroom, and she was being asked to choose again. Stay for appearances or leave for lives. "You're needed, aren't you?" Madison asked softly. Lauren looked up, startled. "Yeah, I am." "Then go," Madison said. "You don't owe anyone here your silence anymore." But she did owe something, didn't she? A toast, a dance, the illusion of being present, of supporting a sister whose choices she didn't always agree with, but still loved. For a moment, Lauren felt paralyzed, caught between two responsibilities that refused to align. And then Brandon appeared, cold, composed, with the slick polish of a man raised on legacy and leverage. "Everything okay here?" he asked, glancing from Madison to Lauren. "Fine," Madison said quickly. "Lauren just has a work emergency." Brandon looked at Lauren, expression unreadable. "Aren't there other people who can handle that? You've done your part today, haven't you?" Lauren met his gaze evenly. "The part that matters is just beginning." Brandon's smile faltered. "Well, whatever you decide, just know that people are watching now. Expectations are higher. It's not just about you anymore." And there it was, the threat beneath the courtesy. The warning that now that she had visibility, she was expected to perform it. "I don't perform," Lauren said, standing. "I act. There's a difference." She turned to Madison. "Congratulations, Mads. Truly." Madison nodded, something shimmering in her eyes. "Come back when you can. We have so much to fix." Lauren pressed her hand once to her sister's shoulder, then walked toward the exit. Her phone was already buzzing again, and this time she answered. "Hayes," she said, her voice steady. "I'm on my way." Have you ever had to choose between the people you love and the purpose that defines you? What if your moment of triumph demanded you walk away from everything you'd waited years to hear? Outside, the cold air bit her skin as the moon rose over Astoria Estate, and Lauren realized some victories begin the moment you leave the ballroom. 2 weeks later, the desert wind of Jordan howled against the canvas walls of the temporary field hospital where Lauren stood, clipboard in hand, sweat sliding down her spine as she coordinated triage rotations. The measles outbreak among the newly arrived refugee children had stretched their already fragile resources to the breaking point, yet somehow they managed. The infection curve was stabilizing. The children were eating again, sleeping, smiling even. But Lauren hadn't. Not really. Not since the night at Astoria Estate when Grant Ellison had bowed to her in front of people who once refused to offer her a chair. It had been the strangest sensation, being recognized in a ballroom full of strangers, and yet more alone than she'd ever felt in a tent full of dying children. Madison had called twice since then, once from her honeymoon in St. Lucia, tentative, warm. The second from New York, where she'd visited the Whitmore Foundation's new education initiative. "We're looking into refugee scholarships," she'd said, her voice uncertain, as though trying on compassion for the first time. Lauren had listened, offered suggestions. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but maybe it didn't need to be. Maybe this was what rebuilding looked like, small, shaky attempts to step into someone else's world. But then the email arrived. It came from an encrypted UN address, marked confidential. It was short, direct. Grant Ellison had nominated her for a joint position, Global Emergency Policy Strategist, a hybrid role that would bridge field operations with international logistics and diplomacy. She'd still do missions, still get her hands dirty, but she'd also sit in rooms where the policies that shaped entire continents were drafted. It was, without exaggeration, a significant opportunity of her career. And she didn't know if she could take it. Lauren had never sought power, never cared about status. The applause in that ballroom had unsettled her not because it was insincere, but because it felt like a betrayal to every moment she'd spent holding a child's hand as they slipped away, to every whispered promise she'd made in languages she barely spoke. Stepping into power meant stepping away from the place where her hands did the most good. It meant being seen but not always understood. She sat on a folding chair just outside the medical tent that night, boots caked in red dust, and stared up at the stars, unfiltered, brutal, beautiful. She thought of Grant's voice that night. Some of us choose to act, some just applaud. She thought of Madison's eyes when she'd said, "We have so much to fix." She thought of Brandon, of the way his smile faded when she'd stood up and walked out. She thought of her younger self, 21, naive, furious, refusing to attend her cousin's debutante ball because she'd just come back from working with displaced families in Sudan. She'd sat in her childhood bedroom that night, dirty boots still on, wondering if she'd ever feel like she belonged in her own country again. A voice cut through the stillness. "Lauren?" She turned. Daniel Reed, from the UN Medical Advisory Committee. He looked tired, his face lit faintly by the floodlight near the supply tent. "We just finished our last assessment. Looks like we're in the clear." He offered a small smile, then hesitated. "You got the offer, didn't you?" Lauren nodded slowly. "I did." He stepped closer, his voice softer now. "So what's holding you back?" She looked down at her hands, scarred, capable, restless. "I don't want to sit in meetings while children die in tents. I don't want to become someone who forgets what this feels like." Her voice cracked. "I don't want to become what they respect, if it means losing what I am." Daniel crouched beside her. "You think leading means leaving?" He paused. "But maybe it means carrying what you've seen into the rooms where people have never looked." Silence, then a whisper of something else. Not certainty, but clarity. She didn't want the applause. She wanted the authority to make the applause unnecessary. 3 months later, Lauren Hayes walked into a different kind of room. Marble floors, armed security, mahogany tables lined with representatives from 12 countries. She wore the same boots under a navy suit tailored not to impress, but to move quickly. She carried a binder of new evacuation protocol reforms in one hand and a flash drive with medical distribution models in the other. Grant met her at the door, nodding once with quiet pride. Her name tag read, Captain L. Hayes, UN Global Emergency Liaison. That night, she video called Madison. Her sister had just come home from volunteering at a youth shelter in Queens. Her hair was pulled into a bun, her eyeliner smudged, but her smile was different. Less practiced, more real. "You look good," Madison said. "Tired, but good." Lauren laughed. "You do too, covered in kid slime, but good." They talked for an hour about nothing and everything. Madison asked real questions. Lauren gave real answers. Somewhere in the middle of the call, she realized she wasn't angry anymore. She didn't need Madison to become her. She just needed her to see her. Weeks passed. Missions came and went. Lauren flew from Lebanon to Geneva to Nairobi, sometimes giving speeches, sometimes washing blood from her hands in tents that still smelled like gunpowder. She stayed close to the ground, but now she also stood high enough to shift the ground for others. The applause never mattered, but the outcomes did. One day, while visiting a newly built children's clinic funded by the Whitmore Foundation, a quiet project spearheaded by Madison, Lauren saw a mural painted across the courtyard wall. It was a group of children holding hands under a sun that wore a crown. In the bottom corner, written in crayon script, "Thank you, Captain Lauren." She sat on the clinic's steps, surrounded by laughing children, and felt something settle inside her. Not peace, not closure, but a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was meant to be. What part of Lauren's journey resonated most deeply with you? And have you ever had to choose between being accepted and being authentic? If you love this story, comment 100 below to let us know. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. And if this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that their path is valid, even if it looks different. Thank you for watching Life Stories.